Namaste everyone. A very warm welcome to all the participants who have joined us for this wonderful evening for today's satsang. I also take this opportunity to welcome our today's speaker, Shri Adinarayanan and Smrithi Adinarayan. Welcome you both for today's session where you will be guiding us on this Gita's beautiful chapter. Just I'll take a few minutes to introduce you all, as many of you are well aware of Indica Yoga, as Indica Yoga is one of the platforms of Indica Academy, which offers authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experience through workshops, courses, retreats, festivals across the world. Our focus more lies in the strength of scholar practitioners' perspective in the path of yoga. We firmly believe that Hatha Yoga is an important step, but we also seek to enrich the practitioners with mantra, sutra, Sanskrit, and the wisdom of Ayurveda and Vedanta, leading towards the well-being and liberation. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us very great sadhakas, Shri Adinarayan and Smrithi Adinarayan, or the founders of Anadi Foundation. Both have been leading a yogic life of simplicity and purpose. After spending some time in the software industry and with the intention of living a life that can be of benefit to the larger number of people, especially towards the youth, they have moved to the academics and more into the sadhana and maunya tapasya for more than 150 days has inspired them to make the essence of the spiritual parampara of the country available to everyone. They continue to teach in a various institutions, accredited institutions, reaching out children, youth, families through many of their online and in-person programs on yoga, Itihasa Purana, Vedanta, blending unique insights from modern science, being the grihasthas and being able to integrate the sadhana into their daily life has inspired a lot of grihasthas to visit them and meet them in ashram. So without taking much time, now I request Shri Adinarayan and Smrithi to lead us today's evening session, which was organized on the occasion of upcoming Gita Jayanti. Namaste to all, and please enjoy the session. Just a request, kindly mute your microphones, and there will be a time given to you all for the question answer as well once we complete the session from there. Over to you, sir.
Namaste. Very, very happy to meet you all. And that too, towards the auspicious occasion of Gita Jayanti, which is remembrance of the true yoga from the Yogeshwara, Bhagavan Shri Krishna. There is a teaching for everybody across space and time. Remembering our true selves, where otherwise we are lost in this Kshara Loka, as it is said, where everything is fleeting, temporary, anitya. And we tend to hold on to it as a nitya vastu. But this Kshara Loka cannot offer what we tend to connect to in terms of nitya. And hence, the spirit of yoga, where we are united with that which is nitya, which is beyond birth and death, which is beyond this fleeting experience, and not looking at this experience as just painful to be avoided, but anchoring ourselves in the yoga taught by Bhagavan Krishna, so that we are free reality, then is Bhagavan's Leela, where we do not encounter anything but that Leela, and not just in a metaphysical sense. So we welcome you all. This is a very auspicious occasion, and we thank the organizers, Indica Yoga. They have been doing great service for the cause of Dharma, for the cause of Bharata, for the cause of that great wisdom which leads us to realize that all of this is nothing but death. So let us begin with an invocation. Om
Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. In fact, this invocatory verse itself has some of the gunas mentioned and inspires us to move from the limited identities to a more expansive identity. The 14th chapter, the 17th chapter, and the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita have so many practical insights on understanding life from the perspective of the gunas. By reading and reflecting on these chapters, we eventually come to at least a glimpse of an understanding that all of this that we see around is a play of the gunas. Even if the understanding is momentarily, even if the understanding is elusive, but still we have gotten a glimpse. And through abhyasa and of course through vairagya, one can sustain this understanding for a longer period of time.
In our regular experience of life, some of us may experience this life as thrilling, energetic, as exciting, but also, with ups and downs. We are excited with so many possibilities that are offered in modern day reality, equally exciting possibilities. But then the problem is of abundance. So many exciting possibilities, what to choose from? What to choose in this, amongst these exciting possibilities. And that itself is the cause of sorrow for many people. This can cause sorrow, where so much is there. Oh, I'm not able to pursue it. That can be a cause of sorrow. Very interesting. We look at all of this and think, oh, all of this is fleeting. All of this is Maya. Is it even worth engaging in? So it is all pain. It's all Moha Maya. And that can make us dry. And also, in the modern sense, many people experience depression because there is a negative detachment, but no positive appreciation. Or for some, life is just going on as a routine. So much so that as we grow in our career, as we grow in our lives, we start seeing through life. We start looking at it as, oh, this is just patterns, cyclical patterns that we are caught up in with no scope for escape. We might do something temporarily to try to avoid this pattern, but then get into different patterns. We may try to escape one pattern and get into another pattern. But when we see those patterns, then it's predictable. Okay, I wake up, I do this, I do that, I get this food, this. Even if we go out for a vacation, it seems predictable. And that is a cause of distress for many people. For some, okay, it's just going on. One does not know why it's happening. It's completely, unconscious. There is no reasoning. Everything seems automatic. Okay, this happens, that happens, and also random. Suddenly, some life event happens, another life event happens, something keeps going. Only at the stage where we are shocked with some life event that is beyond us to handle, that is overwhelming, do we even start reasoning out? What am I doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So like that, there could be many approaches through our own individual life trajectories. And through this, we want an overarching understanding. At the same time, we want a practical wisdom by which we can continue with our life, so that our life does not come to a halt. What if, this is what is known to me, and suddenly taking a plunge into something unknown, that is, again, we hesitate. So we want some practical wisdom, practical advice, which in our own life experience, we might not have the sufficient, what can be called data points in terms of experience to be able to figure out, okay, how is it that I should be able to handle these? What is all this? So we want an overview of what is life, what is this reality, who am I, and yet we want something actionable, practical, that we can apply in Vyavahara. So that is where the Bhagavad Gita stands out, where it gives this entire spectrum. If we can look at it as a spectrum, it gives the top and the bottom of the spectrum, or the left and right of the spectrum, the entire spectrum.
And just like a friend, philosopher, and guide who gives practical insights, suppose you go to somebody with a problem, they would probably say that, why don't we examine the food that you eat, the knowledge that you gain, or what kind of books are you reading? Let's examine that. Are you engaged in acts of charity? Are you, what kind of action are you into? These are the questions that a friend, philosopher, and guide would probably ask, and then examine, and then probably counsel us. So in fact, the 14th, 17th, and 18th chapter precisely bring out insights, very practical insights on all these different dimensions. The 14th chapter, which is the Gunatraya Vibhaga, talks about or gives an understanding of what are the gunas, what are the three gunas, and how do they govern all of reality. And it also defines who is a Guņātīta, who has gone above the gunas. So for instance, suppose you have to have a rocket that leaves the earth, right? So you should have a good understanding of the gravitational forces in order to be able to transcend gravity at that escape velocity, which will take you above the Earth's atmosphere and stay there for a longer period of time. Otherwise, you will fall back on the Earth. Suppose, you throw a ball. Because of gravitational force, it falls down. But suppose you throw it with probably some, say, escape velocity or whatever it is, then there are better chances of staying there without falling. So when you say a Guņātīta, it means that the one who has developed good understanding of the gunas and also has transcended the gunas and experiences a higher degree of freedom with respect to acting in this reality, which we will see in the chapter, through some verses.
And that's where this understanding becomes useful. Where we understand, there is no panic reaction.
Correct.
Otherwise, it can lead to fear and panic. What is happening? Am I doing the right thing? Am I going the right path? Even in spiritual life, many people come to a point where they get this panic attack. Oh, I have spent so much time. Am I doing the right thing? Why am I not getting results? Is it something wrong that I'm doing? Or should I change some methodology? What am I missing? So that's why an overarching framework, even an intellectual framework, is useful. And still practical, advice where it is not just intellectual, just abstract, but also very practically applicable. So this combination becomes a very powerful combination. In the Indian philosophical thought process, we have not shied away from combining these. It seems apparently complex, but that's where these simple principles can be very helpful for us to move forward confidently in our own life process, including the spiritual sadhana that we are into.
So when Arjuna has this question, what are the gunas? And in fact, later in the 14th chapter, he asks about the qualities of a Guņātīta. Now, Arjuna always has these interesting and pertinent questions. He in fact asks, okay, you have defined a Sthita Prajna. You have talked so much about it. So what does a Sthita Prajna look like? How does he walk? How does he conduct himself? So similarly, he asks about who is a Guņātīta and what is the definition. So Bhagavan Shri Krishna...
In fact, this makes me remember, we all want physical, visible signs.
Yes.
So once I was describing in my class how an interaction with, let's say, an Acharya, Mahatma, can be so liberating. Just like an interaction with maybe as science students, an interaction, let's say, if you get with a Nobel laureate, can be highly enlightening. Then someone had this question. So Nobel laureate means, do they go by a BMW or a Benz? In modern terms. So what do they do? What do they eat? So which was not trivial at all. Which is actually, shows that we want visible signs. Now that's where to expect, what to look for. So these are also visible. So once I was explaining to a child how the switches, when it is put on, there is light that glows. But then the child wanted to know what is the connection. The switch apparently does not have any connection with the light. Then how can you prove it? So that's where looking for visibility does not mean just physical signs. So that's where these frameworks can be very, very helpful for looking, in order to look for signs within ourselves as well. Am I proceeding along the right lines? What are the visible signs? Visible does not mean, okay, am I sitting in Padmasana? Am I sitting straight? Those are visible signs, okay, but they are physically visible. These frameworks help us get deeper visibility. So they increase, expand, and deepen our visibility, by which we have very reliable metrics for proceeding confidently in the spiritual path as well as in the regular life path.
So in the 14th chapter, Bhagavan Shri Krishna says, Sattvam rajas tamaiti gunaha prakriti sambhavaha nibadhnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. So the gunas are 3 in number, which is sattva, rajas, and tamas. And it ties the Atman to the body. What attaches the Atman to the body are the gunas. And that helps us to practically function in this world, in this society. And of this, of the sattva, rajas, and tamas, how do you identify, or how do you define sattva? How do you define rajas? Tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakamanāmayam sukhasangena badnati jnana sangena chanaka. So sattva is illuminating, prakasha, and flawless. And it actually attaches to happiness and knowledge. Sukha and jnana. That is the natural orientation of sattva.
In fact, this makes me remember how for many people who are successful, now the next big thing is happiness.
Correct.
Happiness and satisfaction. We seek happiness, and that is a movement.
Correct.
Now material wealth is there. What next? Happiness. So happiness is also looked at as an achievement.
And then we seek for subtler and subtler experiences. Once we have transcended this gross reality of materialism in terms of, I have a comfortable house, a car, or whatever it is, whatever I consider as comfort, then I immediately transcend and then start looking for deeper and deeper experiences. And he defines rajas as rajoragatmakam viddhi trishna sanga samudbhava tannibadnati kaunteya karma sangena dehina. So what is rajas? It's actually born out of passion, right? Raga.
Ragatmakam.
Ragatmakam. So it's full of energy, dynamism, vibrance, and passion, full born out of desire. And it naturally attaches to action and its fruit, karma and karma phala. So whenever we engage in action, in a very forceful action, we naturally experience this rajas. You would have seen people in India, they commonly use these terms. Somebody who's restless, somebody who's always into activity. We've seen so many people. Then they would say that this is a very rajasic person, sometimes in a positive light, sometimes in a negative light. In fact, whatever we see around that is in motion, that's because of rajas. Because rajas is the one that keeps everything in motion, right?
And there, very interestingly, I was interacting with a young person who was against being judged. So many young people now do not want to be judged. Like you mentioned rajasic. Oh, don't call me that. That would be a response. Now, the idea here is to have judgment. But judgment in terms of patterns, not in terms of eternal damnation. So that is not the idea. So eternal damnation is a very different idea. Here, there is judgment, but you're not judged forever. This is a tentative judgment, and there is scope for growth because there is a pathway now that is available. Okay, you are this, no problem. But if you choose to, you can put in effort and grow. So that's the distinction that we need to clearly understand in terms of judgment. And judgment is in terms of repeated experiences or repeated behavioral patterns, attitudinal patterns that we display, which is visible to others. That's why relationships form the mirror to find out more about ourselves. What do people think about us? Not in terms of binding, a stressful, leading to depression, not along those lines, but more along, if we look at it objectively, more in terms of how can I grow? And for that, I need a valid evaluation. Only then it is possible to understand where we stand so that we can take a step forward. So that's where when we say rajas or sattva or tamas. So this is in terms of providing that framework, very importantly for self-analysis. More than judging others, it is also for judging where we stand so that we can take the next step forward.
And when we are in the state of happiness and in the state of seeking knowledge, then it's a very subtle feeling that we have, which is very sattvic in nature. But the moment we get into action and also are bound by the fruits of action, we say that it's rajasic in nature, right?
Yeah.
And tamastvajnanajam vidhi mohanam sarvadehinam pramadalasya nidrabis tannibadnati. So he says that when it is tamas, it is actually bound through pramada, is a certain carelessness, alasya is laziness, nidra is a certain sleep. And this is very much bound by the body, because we think that the body is everything. Mohanam sarva dehina. So we are very attached to the body, and then it is born out of ignorance. So what happens is that we experience a certain dullness. I mean, there are many people who are in deep slumber always, right? Without waking up. And they are in ignorance. They do not know what is right, what is wrong, what is dharmic, what is adharmic, because there is a certain blindness over there.
Yeah.
That is a certain tamas, which actually is a certain delusion.
So to understand it from another perspective, let us look at the same thing from the perspective of neuronal processes. There is the nervous system, we have the peripheral nervous system, and the central nervous system, of which you have the spine and the brain. Now, what we refer to as these, let's say, for example, we describe the rajas in terms of ragatmaka. So raga, how is it formed? If we look at, initially, let's say we associate with someone and pick up a desire. We associate with people in an environment and aspire for something. Now that desire would motivate us further into action along those lines, and that forms neuronal pathways. When we repeatedly engage with the same pattern of action, pattern of desire, action, desire, response, pathways, then that is again and again reinforced and becomes very powerful. Now that is called raga. So raga is where it's constantly reinforced and it's very easy to flow along those lines. And that's why we apply a reverse mechanism to be able to detach ourselves. So vairagya is that detachment that arises from our effort to reverse this flow along those, you can call them neurotransmitter or neurochemical pathways. So to reverse the flow, we need to put in effort again and again, and hence the binding is loosened. Otherwise, it's strong binding, which makes us, makes us view ourselves as that. It forms our identity in a very strong manner. Then we start thinking, I am this and this. And that, when it is very strongly consolidated in terms of the deha abhimana. Deha abhimana means I am this body. I am this, everything for me is to do with the body. Then there is tamas. Because it's so strongly consolidated, those neuronal firing patterns, that the linkage is just strong and well set. So that's where the qualitative difference. So we are looking at a spectrum, not in terms of just compartments, but a spectrum, where how to move from one end of the spectrum to the other, and how to see and assess for ourselves more in terms of a broad understanding where we stand in the spectrum with respect to individual patterns. Because one pattern might be strong, another pattern might be weak or just in formation. So given this understanding will help us approach these frameworks in a very positive, in a very actionable light.
So Bhagavan Shri Krishna continues. He says that when this entire body is illuminated, right? When there is light and discernment that illumines the body, then it means that sattva is predominant. Sarvadvareshu dehesmin prakasha upajayati. So the entire body, or it is filled with that kind of a understanding and illumination. But when it is filled with a lot of passion, a lot of forceful interest and motive to do something, a certain restlessness, thirst for enjoyment, when all this predominates, then it means that we are filled with rajas. Lobha pravrittirarambha karmanamashamaha spriha. So it is filled with that kind of a lobha, greed, and everything. But when tamas actually predominates, it means that there is a sort of disinterest in doing one's own duty. And there is a certain dullness as well. And there is also moha that blinds us. So whatever we are destined, whatever we intend to do, or whatever others intend us to do, or our own functions, our own professional lives or whatever, we don't do it with that kind of an interest or that kind of a passion. We do it with a certain dullness, or we don't engage with it at all. We do see that even before this pandemic came, that pandemic was prevalent.
Yeah.
And in fact, this online engagement has further increased that. Because without that social interactions, people are feeling all the more dull and disinterested in engaging with the real world. Because somewhere they feel very, tamasic about the whole.
Yeah, that's where when we talk of nivritti, nivritti is withdrawing and going beyond the gunas. But here, what we are looking at is very much within the framework of the guna, which is tamas. And tamas is in terms of withdrawal from, one's nitya karma or one's responsibilities, but not in a positive sense. So this is not for any higher aspiration or even escapism. This is more a dullness, a stupor, if we can say, where it is that just manda, where there is no energy to perform it. There is no inclination to perform it. There is no aspiration to grow beyond. In fact, if we look at the predominant educational processes or even aspirational processes of many young people, or even most of the population, we would see that these samskaras, these background, we can call them patterns, become very evident. Some would be oriented towards jnana and happiness, would always want a balanced emotional state. They would want to protect it. Now, wanting to protect that balanced emotional condition is not wrong. But that is the orientation that Bhagavan Krishna is presenting as sattva. Some would always want to focus on knowledge, gain knowledge, and optimize everything away for the sake of knowledge and balance of mind. Now, that is sattva guna. Some would want to orient themselves in terms of action, in terms of, there is a thirst to prove oneself. Dynamism to prove oneself.
And if you put them in a position where it's just knowledge oriented, then they would get frustrated and bored. So even while designing, say workplaces, we have a mix of these people. We'll have to be mindful of the interests of people.
Yeah.
Because not everything can be knowledge oriented, because not everybody is oriented that way. Yeah. So maybe some amount of action orientation may be needed for those to cater to those people.
And that's where that action can be positively channelized. No, sattva, rajas, tamas are not in terms of sattva is great, tamas is bad. These are not looked at along just those lines. These are also looked at from the angle of principles. How do we use these principles to go forward? So that's where the practical dimensions, Bhagavan Krishna touches upon, even in terms of, food, yajna, tapas, dana, knowledge. All of these are looked at in terms of these principles. So when we judge, even the judgment can be looked at in terms of tamasic judgment or sattvic judgment.
Okay.
A rigid judgment would be tamasic judgment. While a fluid judgment that gives scope for growth would be a sattvic judgment. So that's where through various, approaches and presenting the context in diverse practical scenarios, Bhagavan Krishna actually gives us the principle in a very, very beautiful manner. It is very relevant to us. It helps us introspect. And as we introspect, more and more of that rasa, energizes us.
And in the 17th chapter, we will come back to the 14th chapter towards the end. In the 17th chapter, Arjuna has this question. What about these people who do not have faith in our scriptures and who act against the scriptures and all that? So Bhagavan Shri Krishna goes on to elaborate on what are the different kinds of shraddha or what are the different kinds of faith. Even that can be of three kinds in terms of sattva, rajas and tamas. And not only that, food, yajna, knowledge, tapas, dana, all these can be defined or looked at from the perspective of the three gunas. So let's take food, for example. Right? Food is a favorite topic of many of us, and especially since the lockdown started, it's become even more favorite.
Yeah, many have been asking us, see, how do we design our food? Body mass. Some look at new, but some are just they just want a solution to their problems, health problems. Like
or some are into snacking, like every 1 hour, because they have time.
So what is the right way to approach it? Because if we get into certain rules, for example, someone was mentioning that they are into an Ayurvedic diet, and we were curious to know what that is. So when they explained to it, it seemed okay. Then the entire focus of their life would be only food, because they had so many niyamas, so many constraints by which practically all the time they would be optimizing only for food. They cannot eat this in this manner, cooked in this manner, with this vessel, and so on by these people. So that's where we also need practical understanding
and a more foundational principle. That will give us some operating freedom to design what we eat.
Because otherwise, we can get into extreme conflicts within ourselves, conflicts with the people around us, just on these terms of, like, for example, food. There can be so much emotional discontent because we think a certain way, we are advised in a certain manner, and we are not able to resolve it in a healthy manner. Where how do we resolve these conflicts? That's where what Bhagavan Krishna shares here is amazing for conflict resolution within us as well. It leads us to a samadhana, state of samadhana, where we are able to these apparent conflicts, we are able to resolve them and thereby experience peace. So it's a very liberating idea that is presented here.
So he says, Ayu sattva balarogya sukha priti vivardhanaha rasyaha snigdaha stira hridya aharaha satvika priya. So he says people who have sattvic orientation prefer food that enhance their longevity, enhances their happiness, enhances their health, their cheerfulness, which are juicy, rasa, filled with rasa, and which are succulent, right? And which are also oily, snigdaha, maybe with ghee and butter, probably. And I mean, we are close to dinner time as well. And which are substantial, basically, which fill the stomach so that there's no hunger pang.
And we feel fulfilled.
And it is a natural agreement with the body. So that way, the food becomes this is the food that sattvic people prefer.
So this is very interesting because this is not talking of, hey, this is the nutrition that you need to focus on. This omega-3 you definitely need. It's not focusing on such objective aspects, which are also very important.
Yes.
So that is good to know. But this also connects us in an introspective manner to ourselves. How do we feel about it? We might have eaten the right nutrition, but still not feel right. But that's where connecting the objective with the subjective is beautifully done here.
And foods that are high on, say, bitterness, katu, amla, soreness, or sour, or lavana, salty, pungent, right, ushna, and dry, ruksha, and all these qualities which are extreme in the food, that is preferred by people of Rajasic nature.
And this we also see, this is not in terms of, okay, we should never have these kinds of food. That's not the idea.
Predominantly,
yeah.
it is.
In fact, once I regularly used to go on a month-long tapasya, Mauna tapasya. At that time, I would not be having any of these, especially sour, salty, or pungent tastes, spicy food. So I would avoid spices and salt. It would be very simple food that is suitable, which does not disturb the Vata Pitta Kapha. So that there can be long hours of meditation and so on. After the month of sadhana, when I would introduce, for example, salt in my food, I would immediately, that is what gave me an understanding of, this framework that Bhagavan Krishna is saying. All this would be visible in the system. I would start understanding, okay, the blood is rushing. And for example, if I wish to use anger, and if I'm just on a certain kind of diet, then the body will be incapable of anger. Displaying anger means your sympathetic nervous system needs to be activated. Your breathing should be increased. Your heart rate should increase. Your blood pressure should pump up. These, in a certain sense, would almost be difficult with just a certain kind of diet. So that's where, even including, when we say katva, amla, lavana, all these are not considered bad. What is a limiting factor is attachment to just these. So when we use it in an appropriate manner, using it means you start understanding, you are detached, you start understanding how to utilize this instrument in terms of the body and mind. And you can operate this body and mind in appropriate manner. So that's where an understanding of these become helpful. Sometimes you would need, for the body to just be in a state of rest. For which certain kind of food would help.
In fact, he says dukkha shokamaya pradaha. So these kinds of food actually eventually result in kind of a grief and sickness and suffering.
And why? Because I have also seen, for example, it causes excitement.
Yeah.
And in our excitement, that is the blinding that happens. Our emotions blind the reasoning qualities. In neuroscience terms, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for most of the reasonableness that we display. So the emotional part, if it overrides this reasoning part, then we are not able to project into the future in terms of what our actions would entail. So if we are not able to see the consequences into the future, then let's say, for example, we display anger where it should not be displayed, then anyhow we have to face the consequences. At that time we repent, at least that is good. But let's say we repent, but still not everything can be resolved, because already we have flown so much. That's where dukkha, shoka, it produces these because of the coloring or the blinding of emotions and so on, which is also induced by the food that we have.
And yatayamam gatarasam puti paryushitam chayat. And he describes the food that is preferred by tamasic people, which is ill-cooked food or not fully ripe, which is stale in nature, which is polluted, or which is overcooked, which is impure in nature. And these foods are preferred by tamasic people, and in turn, these foods also cause a certain tamasic nature. You would have seen that when we eat overcooked food or over-processed food, which has gone through multiple times of cooking, right? Suppose you take a tomato and then you cut it and then you have a salad. That's one level of doing that. But then you take a tomato and then you say fry it in the pan. That's one level of cooking. But then you put it inside something and again you or deep fry that. It means that the tomato has gone through multiple levels of overcooking, and then its property completely changes, and the vipaka it has on the body, it's completely different.
Yeah, this is called vipaka, or the post-digestive effect that it has on the system.
Yes.
So
And
these are very practical aspects. Otherwise, we may project ourselves in terms of our life to be happy, to be peaceful, to be successful in terms of even sadhana, but not get there because these aspects have not, these practical considerations have not been looked at. That's where these practical considerations are so very important to move forward, step by step along the path that we choose for ourselves.
So after talking about food, he goes on to talk about the kind of dana or charity that we can engage in. So the kind of dana, whenever we do dana, when there is no expectation of the return there, then it is believed to be sattvika dana, or in fact a sattvika yajna, right? And whenever this yajna is done for the sake of pomp and show, for name and fame, then it is a rajasika yajna. And whatever yajna is done without any consideration for the rules and regulations, or not done according to the scriptures, where the fee is not paid to the person who is doing the yajna for us, or there are no sacred chants involved, but purely done with a completely, crooked sense, then it is called a tamasika yajna. And it has its own consequences.
Yeah. That's why yajna is looked at in terms of not just say, generally people map yajna with homakunda.
Correct.
But if we look at the principle of yajna, wherever there is a flow and a cyclical pattern, that's a yajna. And there, if appropriate understanding is not displayed, then it, because everyone participates in it, appropriate, understanding means that everyone is satisfied in their own expectations, appropriate, knowledge is displayed, the rules and regulations are followed, and hence that leads to benefit, overall benefit. That overall benefit, when it happens, it's sattvika in nature. When the overall benefit is completely ignored without any understanding, that is tamasic in nature. Even our life process in that sense, if we look at it as a flow, the flow of yajna, it becomes a yajna karma when the flow is in terms of benefit to ourselves and benefit to this entire reality. But then when we don't see meaning and purpose into our own life process, then that impedes the flow. And that leads to tamas. So that's where investing time, effort in understanding ourselves, understanding our own life path, this flow.
And when it even comes to the austerities or tapaha or tapas that we follow, even that has been decoded through the gunas. So whenever we do or engage in tapas, without expecting any return, for the sheer, one you can say, joy of it, or the sheer experience, or as a process of deepening or connecting life to the source, then it is very sattvic in nature. But then what happens is that when we do it with some kind of a selfish gain in mind, and there is some fruit that we are expecting out of the tapas, then it becomes rajasic nature. And it is not said that it is bad or good, because many times people can only afford to take up austerities with some kind of a fruit in mind, because that is how practically it is done in the society. But then one has to understand that it is still limited in nature. It is still not sattvic in nature, but nevertheless, if that is what works momentarily, it's still okay. But then if it is done with a certain foolish notion, or with the perspective of harming others, our tapas harming others, then it is looked at as a tamasika tapas.
This, this judgment framework helps us reflect in our own lives. Why are we doing what we are doing? Do we have a reasonable knowledge of the why part? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And that also needs to be informed appropriately. If it is not informed appropriately, then it can be a tamasic action. That's where, for example, for many people, when they have this question, what am I here for? What is my life? What is its reality? What am I engaged in? What is the purpose of my life? Do I see my life as valuable? These are very helpful questions for us to identify whether we are in a state of tamas or not. And if we are in a state of tamas, that means there is avidya, there is ignorance with respect to who we are, what we are doing. And that is considered valid. It's not this, as I mentioned, it's not eternal damnation. This analysis is considered valid, and that motivates us to change our state by putting in effort, seeking knowledge, and thereby grow from tamas, where we start seeing reason and value to our life, to the actions that we pursue in life.
In fact, what Bhagavan Shri Krishna talks about knowledge or jnana in the 18th chapter is very reflective of the kind of education that is desirable and currently what is happening in the society. So he says, Sarva bhuteshu yenaikam bhavam avyayam ikshate avibhaktam vibhakteshu tajnanam vidhi satvika. And pratatvena tu yajnanam nana bhavan pratak vidhan veti sarveshu bhuteshu tajnanam vidhi rajasa. Yattu kritsnavad ekasmin karye saktam mahaitukam atatvartavat alpam chatat tamasam udahritam. So he says the kind of knowledge where we perceive everything to be connected, interconnected, undivided, that one imperishable divine that is pervading everything, then that is sattvika knowledge. But however, when we cognize things or when we perceive things as distinct categories, this is this is that, this is a tree, this is an animal, this is good, this is bad, this is tall, this is short, and the moment we start looking at beings, differently, separate from one another, that is rajasic knowledge. But then when we have no understanding of it, no real understanding of it, where we have misconceptions, where we have irrational thoughts without having a grasp over things, then that is called tamasic knowledge. And we do see that in the modern scientific pursuit, we often are encouraged to look so much at the differences that we become so specialized and focused on the differences that we forget to see that one tattva that connects all of life around us. And that is probably something that is missing in the current educational process, which probably could be brought through centers of learning which are focused on our Bharatiya Paramparik knowledge. Because the Bharatiya knowledge starts from within and then goes outside. So fundamentally, we first understand the interconnected principle. Then we go outside and look at all the categories. We do that. vitarka, vichara, and everything. We do go into those Visesha Gunas or Guna Karma Vibhaga. But then we start with the Adhyatma and then go outside. So that way, knowledge, pursuit of knowledge becomes very sattvic in that sense.
At this juncture, maybe I can narrate a personal anecdote. As to my own life path, in the framework of what is being discussed, I clearly remember a time I used to constantly be aware of the body and the mind, if you can model it along those lines. When you are looking at it not from an abstract framework, but in an experiential manner, you clearly see the body and see the mind. Okay, maybe clearly or may not be clearly, that is still okay. But I used to see the body and the mind, and the body was very small. Now the body has grown. Likewise, the mind was, so much content has gotten added to it, which so there is also a process of growth and change. But at a certain time when I was young, since I used to see this, I would not be able to understand the pattern of growth, the pattern of change that is happening in the body or the mind. I would be aware of the change, but I don't know what is happening. That would seem a very limiting, constraint. And when I study, my textbooks in schools, and when I discuss with the elders and those around me in my small, reality that you have when you are in school, your reality, at least my reality, was just my parents and a few members of the school or my immediate neighborhood. So within that, from that, I could not gain knowledge as to what was happening. So it was in the dark. I know something is happening, but I did not have knowledge which would illustrate the principles. And later, as I started exploring more and more, I encountered knowledge which would give me, objective principles, but not the interconnecting principles. And hence, it would always remain separate, compartmentalized. And that would be a lot of frustration. Yeah, this is fine. I understand what this is, this. That kind of a knowledge in physics, math, chemistry, biology, that we would receive. But then, how to interconnect them? What am I missing? That would not be visible. So that knowledge, and that was a very frustrating experience, because you are constantly seeing these, but seeing is experiencing. But then you cannot step beyond that experience. You are constrained by the experience. You can describe that experience better, but still you are constrained by it. And that's where, later on, after I graduated, I had the experience of samadhi, which I now have the words to describe. At that time, it was also an experience, which I did not have an understanding of. I just had the experience. But that was a very liberating experience. So that's where, that was an experience where I could see that what is here in terms of the Atma, now that I can describe it, I could see it everywhere. So that is the thing. And when I say see, it is not the physical sight, okay? Not in, please do not imagine some light that is shining, not in that sense. But it's a deeper seeing, which I could see as that's the same principle that there is all present, ever present. There is nothing else that is there. Everything else is just, on top of it. So that unifying principle is also knowledge, which is what is here described in terms of this, what kind of knowledge do we need to engage in? Because that is the consequence, if we engage in a particular kind of knowledge, then as a consequence of it, you have that kind of understanding that what has gone in shapes your understanding of reality. Your understanding could be in terms of all is compartmentalized, or your understanding could be in terms of, oh, everything is, connected. and diverse manifestations of that same truth. That in Tamil, what we describe as Paramporul, the fundamental principle. Everything is a manifestation of that. So all of this is still to do with knowledge. So in that sense, even intellectual knowledge becomes very, very important, where it not just describes this diversity, but also gives us terminologies and gives us a hang of that interconnecting principle.
In fact, if you look at many people who deeply invest in science research, maybe at the level of the school, they study in terms of, animals, birds, living things, non-living things. In fact, I remember during my first standard, almost the first lesson would be living things and non-living things, the difference between them. But then once you go into deeper research and quantum reality, you see that the differences become quite fuzzy, because you realize that everything is a certain vibration. Maybe living cells vibrate in a certain way, but what we call rocks or stones or minerals or whatever other kinds of matter, they vibrate in a different way. But we do see that in the lives of scientists. When I was in Italy for a year, and I had a chance to talk to a few scientists, like physicists for that matter, and some of them were in fact Nobel laureates. Then you see that there is a huge, deep philosophical bent of mind that they have. They become extremely philosophical about life, because the deeper they go, they start seeing these interconnections. So that way, that the knowledge becomes very subtle and sattvic in nature, because as they go deeper and deeper, they start losing perspective of the differences, and they start more looking at how everything is, all of life is connected.
In fact, that's the idea of theory of everything. That people try to pursue. And that's the reason why the Indian knowledge systems, the Bharatiya Jnana, becomes so very important, because that actually provides us with a huge corpus of existing knowledge, which can be utilized to positive benefit for the entire world.
And in fact, at the Gurukulam that we have at our ashram, we have a small Gurukulam where children above 10 years of age study. We try to bring in this principle of Adhyatma and the knowledge and sciences flowing out of that, so that it's an inside and then coming out perspective, more than exploring everything and then finally realizing that the inside is more important.
Maybe that also is modeled after our personal life experience, because our personal life experience has never been outside in. It's always been inside first, and then how do we gainfully express it in diverse manners. So that way there is always a connecting thread, there is a flow to it, which is a continuous process. It's not compartmentalized and then trying to figure out and retrofit into maybe a patchwork mechanism, trying to make sense of life. So that way, this knowledge becomes liberating when we approach it along these lines.
So coming to Bhagavan Shri Krishna's answer to Arjuna's question, who is a Guņātīta? What are the qualities? He says that one who does not differentiate between this, or one who does not focus so much on this sattva, rajas and tamas. He neither hates sattva nor rajas nor tamas as well, and nor does not long for it. He does not want to be in a sattvic state or a rajasic state or a tamasic state. He is a Guņātīta. He is the one who has transcended the gunas. Prakasham cha pravrittim cha moham eva cha pandava na dveshti sampravrittani na nivrittani kankshati. So he is neither longing for it nor is hating the gunas.
Yeah, this is very practically very insightful. Because it also, I was interacting with a person who was sharing his life, his spiritual journey. And along the path, at some point in time, he wanted to meditate. He wanted to, study, the Shastra. And he started looking at everybody as an obstruction to that pursuit. His parents were an obstruction to that pursuit. His friends were an obstruction to that pursuit. His work was an obstruction to that pursuit, and that got into depression. So that's where this provides a way to resolve the conflict. Now the judgment the frameworks for judgment has been stated, but now you also go beyond the judgment framework where you can harmonize these so that your life is a flow.
So he says that, knowing that this is what is governing the entire universe, the Guņātīta, remains established in the identity with the higher principle and never falls down from that state. Just as we talked about the rocket or the ball that has gone with the escape velocity, does not feel the need to return back or does not fall because of gravity. And the Guņātīta also treats the sukha and dukkha in a similar manner. Whether it is a piece of earth or soil or whatever it is, or a stone or a piece of gold, all these are valued in a very harmonious way or an equalizing manner. And whatever is pleasant, unpleasant, that is looked at in a samabhava. Samadukka sukha swastha samaloshtashva kanchana. So whether it is some kind of a metal or a gold or what, or a stone or earth, it is looked at in a very samabhava.
See, again, the sense of value is created. We have described the neuronal process.
Yes.
Through repeated engagement, we start seeing value in something and devalue something else.
Yes.
That is the raga. No, we value something and devalue something else. And this we accept as our identity, as our personality trait. Yeah, this is valuable to me. This not so valuable. This is what creates a sense of a concrete identity for us.
In fact, this valuation and devaluation also he talks about. He says, Tulya priya priyo dhiras, tulya nindatma sanstutihi. So you weigh them as equal.
Yeah.
You don't put down one and then favor the other. You just weigh them as equal, whether it is priya or apriya. It is,
And when would one be able to do that? That's the practical question. If one is at the level of the, just the actionating self, involved in the world all the time, and not being able to detach oneself and be the witness to oneself, then one is just, involved in these values of judging. Okay, this is sattva, rajas, tamas, all the time judging. And that judgment can become a huge burden to carry. All the time we are judging ourselves, judging others, and the more sattvic you become, the more judgmental if you become, then it is going to be a huge burden. It's going to be a crushing load that one carries. And that also leads, we have seen in many people, an extreme state of self-criticality. One is extremely self-critical. So this is very useful to understand. That's why resolving this harmoniously in terms of a Guņātīta is so very important. And for that, a practical thing is in terms of resolving oneself to the witness. As yoga is described in, say, for example, the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. It's beautifully described as Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Tada Drashtu Swarupe Avasthan. Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra. So one is in the state of a drashta, when in the state of yoga, and there is samadhi. So one is a witness, and as a witness, everything is flowing, and the flow is in terms of the the gunas of the prakriti. Gunas in terms of sattva, rajas, tamas, it's constantly flowing. One is the witness, which is not impacted by any of these. When that is maintained, that is also in terms of practical steps to achieving that. One is not the ahankara, but one's nidhana or centering is in the Ishvara or one's guru or in the mantra. All of these are practical strategies that are very gainfully applied in centering ourselves beyond the play of the gunas, so that we see the play of the gunas, and that is enjoyment. That is divine enjoyment, divine leela, where we see the play of the gunas, but we are not touched by it at all. And that is not tamasic indifference. It is not that at all. It's a divine indifference. We become udasina. We are in para vairagya, and that helps us lead you can say, a practically divine life, which is what is illustrated with the life of Bhagavan Krishna.
In fact, if you have to play a game well, it's better that we understand the rules of the game, right? Suppose we are playing cricket. When we understand the rules of cricket, then we are comfortable playing that. Otherwise, we don't know what to do there. Similarly, if we have an understanding of what governs this reality in terms of the gunas, then we have better handle over our lives. Otherwise, we don't know who's in control. We often feel that we are not in control, and something else is controlling, and especially evil is controlling, because or not a favorable situation is actually controlling our lives. But then when we understand the principles, it helps us to have a better hang of life, better understanding of life, and we might come to a conclusion that I am controlling it, or the divine is controlling it, or whatever conclusion we come to, but at least we have a better understanding of things.
And this also helps us direct the flow towards sattva, the movement or the progression or the evolution from tamas to sattva. That in all aspects of life, in all aspects of human endeavor, that becomes possible when we are this witness, we are this sakshi, untouched by the gunas, and yet we can practically operate in this reality because of the framework that is presented. And
when we look at the entire cosmos, it is governed by the gunas, because all things move in the cosmos because of rajas, and all things that we see stable and the matter is because of tamas. And there is a divine intelligence that is governing in terms of the sattvic principle. So the gunas per se are not good or bad, but just that it limits our experiences in certain ways, and that is what the chapters highlight. So it was wonderful sharing whatever we have understood and learned from the Gita.
And very practically, this gives us a clear understanding of who we are,
yes,
as beyond the gunas. Even if we intellectually appreciate it, that's a big step forward. And then we gainfully apply practical strategies to stay firm in that realization and deepen that realization.
So if you have questions, please ask a question.
Thank you so much, Adinarayan and Smrithi, for bringing us different dimensions, which is one of the very important aspect of human existence, these three gunas, and how one can transform or, rise above these dualities and see correctly. It was very interesting to hear you both bringing wonderful dimensions and experiences, sharing from your own life journey, and throwing light onto very simple but very deep insights, which each one can take and reflect on in days to come. I think Mr. Shivalingam is raised his hand, so you can directly unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can either put your question in the chat. Yes, Shivalingam.
Thank you very much. I want to ask whether we can identify a person who has transcended all these gunas.
So that's where, as we, at the beginning mentioned, so identification is in terms of visible signs, but how visible do we want it to become? So visibility is in terms of, if we are looking at physical signs, see then, for example, this in the, generally, we have our ashram near Parni, and Parni is known for Siddhar Bhoganatha. So the Siddha tradition, they apply this vibhuti. And vibhuti is seen as a sign. For example, in Tamil, we call them Jnanapadam. Jnanapadam means who have reached to the ultimate fruit of knowledge. And what is that? That is what we are discussing here. What is the ultimate fruit of knowledge? that this is perishable. This is, but we are not this perishable entity. We are something that is imperishable. So, that's why the ash is applied to signify that and to center our awareness on that. So now, how would one know if I am centered on that or not? So this is applied as an external symbol, a visible symbol, which is visible physically. But this is to indicate certain inner signs which are visible to those who have the eyes to see it. And that's where the Shastra gives such vision, to be able to understand it within ourselves. So only by going within can we understand the signs and symptoms that are available without. So just as to be able to connect, sympathize or empathize with someone else, what emotions they are going through, we need to go through them in our own lives. When we have gone through them, then we are able to connect with them, those who are suffering or those who are happy and so on. We are able to connect because we have gone through it, we understand it. Likewise, when we go deep, we have an experience of Atma Sakshatkara, we understand ourselves from that angle, then we are able to connect with all of reality. So the deeper we are able to experience ourselves, we are able to see signs and symptoms, what we can call outside, because there is no other in the core sense. But since we are looking at signs and symptoms, these are given beautifully in the tradition. So visibility is not in terms of physical. Those are external aspects which are also considered important. So if a person wakes up in the morning, has a bath, for example, in Margari month in Tamil Nadu, people take up a bath at 4 a.m., let's say. Those are visible signs of sattva. But here we are discussing how to go beyond that. So Guņātīta are not to do with visible signs at all.
Correct.
Visibility is in terms of this framework of tamas, rajas, sattva. But that's where visibility ends, because everything is nothing but that, Atman or Brahman. That is the thing that liberates us from this framework of the gunas. Otherwise, we are still stuck in the framework of the gunas.
And in fact, in the face of challenges, how do people handle it? That can also be reflective of how much they have been able to transcend sukha, dukkha, name, fame, good name, bad name, whatever they get out of that situation. How well are they able to handle it? Have they transcended that? That can also become an indicator, as Bhagavan Shri Krishna has mentioned in the 14th chapter.
Yeah. For example, Karna, when he was called Sutaputra, he handled it very badly. But Krishna was called a cowherd, which is a much lower standard in that sense. But he handled it, coolly, let's say, So that balance of mind, his life is the proof, is the message of what he is describing. Similarly, Bhagavan Rama, imagine he was to be made, made the crown prince. Next moment, he's just sent to the forest, and he just handles it objectively with no imbalance at all. So that's why these are showcased in, they are highlighted in the Indian tradition for us to learn from. How the great people behave. Everyone else, even through imitations, they slowly learn those and integrate those so that they become those embodied values. So in that sense, these visible signs and symptoms are also described for us to emulate, and those are very helpful. Those are the best practices that we can utilize for our own growth.
Thank you. We have Manjunath ji who has raised his hand. Manjunath ji, you can unmute yourself and share your question.
So my question is, one is to detach and know that we can be Guņātītas, but also in the process we actually end up changing the guna. I'll just give instead of talking abstractly, let's say Gandhi, disobedience for the longest time was looked at as a negative value, right? That's of course human valuations, right? But through his life and the way he embodied disobedience, people today have started to see that, oh, disobedience also can be used for constructive purposes. And, essentially the guna itself got changed through the spirit of Gandhi, right? I at least was not able to sense that aspect actually being discussed, because it was a lot of, yes, don't get embroiled with the gunas that are there. But there is also a factor where humans have the ability that through their embodiment can actually change the guna in the Prakriti itself. So what does Bhagavad Gita talk about this? And that I didn't at least perceive a longer discussion on that. And is there a reason why that was not, a core, or maybe I have not heard it properly? Can you throw some light on how you can actually transform guna itself through our spirit?
Yes. So towards the end, we had mentioned when you are the witness, then you have power over the gunas. You can direct them appropriately. And that's where evolution is in terms of tamas to sattva. And that's how civilization progresses. Otherwise, there is no progress. So in that sense, when we are Guņātīta, again, when we say when we are Guņātīta, that is putting it in a very rigid manner. We are already that. And we are having a human experience. That is a good way of approaching it. So we are already beyond the gunas. That's the core aspect. But we may choose to live at the surface level. So the deeper we go, the more the bala that we have to be able to change the gunas at that level. So this understanding can be very helpful for especially great leaders who wish to transform society, which is what is displayed in the lives of great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi ji. When there is a deeper view of things, that itself provides us the capability to see patterns, and certain patterns as working, certain patterns as dysfunctional. And that gives us the power to transform them. So this, in a subtle manner, is presented through the frameworks. But how we internalize it, that's why the reason, there is the framework of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. We need to internalize it, and that over a period of time, that internalization, that being embodied knowledge, that helps us actionate in our spheres of influence, moving things which we perceive as tamasic to sattvic. That capability exists in each one of us. And this is to provide a framework to utilize that and make a concrete difference.
Any other questions from the audience side? As we are not hearing, I think take it as, there is a lot of manana and nididhyasana is going on in each one of us to, to reflect back whatever we have been heard. And what a wonderful Saturday evening to listen to you both, and to have the satsanga and to reflect back again and again, because Gita is such a vast subject. It has got an answer for every walks of life on everything. And the topic you both brought into us today, this Guņātīta, is really a fitting thing for us to, take this Gita Jayanti day, because the day is not just about the celebration, it's more about a manana, to remember the essence and to remember the teachings more again and again, and to take it forward. And we are very grateful to both of you for accepting our invitation and giving us this lucid presentation. Look forward for more such interactions. And in case if people wants to connect with you, is there a way where they can reach out to you? If you want to just share your email IDs or any information, you can share it in the chat box. Yeah, you can share it.
So they can connect with us at mail@anadi.org, And we also have a Telegram channel where we post all our upcoming programs.
So mail at anadi.org. Thank you.
e.in /Anadi Foundation. Life Foundation.
Thank you. Before I just take a few minutes to conclude and ask you for your final message, just wanted to inform our audience a few upcoming events from the Indica. I request Kotiji to put up the poster for tomorrow's program. So since from today, we have been, Indica is organizing a Hindu meditation conference on Hindu meditation and traditional techniques. So this is started today and it will be there for tomorrow as well. So I invite all of you to take your time and join us for this conference. This is a whole day event, which you can access through Indica Facebook page or YouTube. And there is also a registration which you can do through the thing. Another interesting online program immersion coming up through Indica Yoga is a course on Dhyana Yoga. It's an online textual immersion program extensively dealt on the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which will be led by Shri Jayaraman Mahadevanji, who is the Director of Textual Research of Indica. So he will be taking through us a very detailed understanding about the concept of Dhyana Yoga in the light of Bhagavad Gita. And another interesting thing which is coming up in the January is a retreat again on the Gita. That is, we are having a Swami Chidanandji who will be holding a residence retreat from January 7th to 9th. For more details, you can visit our Indica Yoga website. There's a 3-day residential retreat happening in the Bangalore. So I invite all of you to, find time and take part in events. So we will just request Adinarayan and Kaji to just share a final message to our friends, and then we can conclude with three.
These frameworks are not just useful for intellectual analysis. That's where actionating on this, when we say, Bhagavan Krishna, Arjuna, they incarnated for the specific purpose of Dharma Rakshana. Now, anything in creation, if we look at any aspect of creation, we look at the Upadana Karana, Nimitta Karana. Upadana Karana is material principle, material causative principle. Nimitta Karana is the intelligent causative principle. When we combine together, that leads to some creation. So even value systems in society, values in our own lives, values in organizations, values in our families, all of these are worthwhile investing in terms of knowledge and effort. If that is not understood, then automatically values degrade. So that's where we see through the example of Avatara Purushas, Mahatmas. When someone asks this question of civil disobedience, that is also in terms of upholding a value. It's a positive action, not actually a negative action, as I look at it. So that's where upholding values in society, that is also in terms of action. So it can be subtle action, it can be gross action. That's where these frameworks help us, understand who we are. We as being beyond action, who can guide action for very concrete results in society, in our lives, in the lives of others as well. Beneficial consequences. That's where Dharma protects the one who protects it. And we can clearly see even this in an online meeting where Indica Yoga and the Indica network, they are doing so much positively in terms of sustaining Dharma, sustaining value ecosystem in the larger reality and also in individual life. So these values are the ones that have guided the Bharatiya Sanskriti. These are civilizational best practices that have been handed over down the ages. So that's where let's put these frameworks to good, good use by better participation in the reality both within and around us. So these frameworks enable that participation. We can participate in a vibrant manner in these processes, gaining knowledge and also progressing in the spiritual path. So we will end with a short invocation. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. May the benefit that we have received spread benefit and joy to all beings everywhere. With
Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Adinarayanan ji and Smrithi ji, for your wonderful time. We look forward for more such interactions in the Indica Yoga platform. And I invite all the audience, if you have missed any of it, you can revisit through Indica Yoga website or the YouTube channel, where you can revisit these recordings, so which could help us, reflect. So until then, we take leave. Have a wonderful evening. Namaste, Shubhrat. Thank you.